Hi, everybody. Welcome to this Congressional Continuity exercise. I am Marci Harris, CEO and co-founder of POPVOX, and my co-organizers are Lorelei Kelly from the Beeck Center for Social Impact and Innovation at Georgetown, and Daniel Schuman, Policy Director at Demand Progress. You're going to see them later as witnesses and as our clerk for this exercise. We're all former staffers and friends of Congress who work together with a larger, loose cohort to bring new ideas to the Hill and to help Congress increase its own capacity to fulfill its constitutional role. Sometimes that involves technology, other times it doesn't. Some members of the broader cohort, alongside staffers and political scientists, will be joining us today. And I want to make sure you know that that does not indicate an endorsement of remote hearings, remote votings, or anything like that. This is a test. This is only a test, and we're going to be taking what we learned today and sharing it with the public, with the committees, and with others. So we all know that Congress is facing some pretty unique challenges right now. Today, there's a report out that Senator Probst may consider holding some of its hearings with administration officials and agencies remotely. So there are going to be some big questions that committees and others are facing about how they use technology in the coming weeks and months. So the idea behind this exercise is to lessen some of the unknowns, to identify issues to be addressed, and to the greatest extent possible, de-risk the prospect of actually beginning to use some of these technologies in congressional proceedings. The role-playing exercise will run for about 30 minutes, and then we'll have a discussion. You will all also receive a survey at the end of this exercise asking you for some of your thoughts and observations and how it worked for you. Especially for those of you who are playing roles, think about how the experience was for you in that role, but also how was it for you overall. I'm going to mute everybody for now, just because there's a little bit of background noise, but we'll make sure that you are not muted later. Also want to say a little bit about the technology. You can see we're still figuring it out too. Zoom, we're using Zoom in its webinar function. I'm in no way affiliated with the company. We just use it, and I wanted to share the experience of how it's worked for us. For this exercise, we've chosen to use the non-password protected Zoom webinar. You can also set up with a password protection. There's also a streaming option. So if this were to be used by a committee for a hearing that would be viewable by the public, you could stream on YouTube or some other services rather than actually having the public sign in to Zoom. As many of you saw, I promoted several attendees to panelists, which means that they can show their screen, speak, and share their screen. There's the chat in the bottom right-hand corner that many of you have found. One of the things that we would invite you to do is treat this as a dress rehearsal. So everybody's going to try to keep their character, but it will be bumpy, and you will see lots of things that somebody should have thought of and nobody has thought of before. This is the opportunity to think of those things. So please write down a note or drop it in the chat. We're going to compare those notes later. For speakers, we're going to suggest that you turn off your video when you're not speaking. We're kind of testing the theory that we're going to want members of Congress to not be showing reaction shots when somebody else is speaking and try to take the pressure off of everybody to look really interested and informed. So if you find that button in the bottom left-hand corner that says stop video, please do that when you're not speaking. And then when you are speaking, if it works for you, please turn on your video. So today around here, there's a mix of staffers, political scientists, friends of Congress. We also have a Politico reporter and a representative from C-SPAN. One of the big questions is how this would work for public access to proceedings if Congress decides to do something virtually. And one programming note, I want to make sure you know that we know that there is actually really no such thing in the wild, or not usually, of a hearing/markup. So today we're holding a procedural anomaly just to test out some functions. The first part will be a hearing with witnesses. The second part will be a markup with amendments, and we'll see how that goes. And now I just want to mention that we have some wonderful guests who are helping us pull this together today. And I think this really illustrates, from the former staffers to the people I'm about to introduce, how much people continue to care about this institution. So the formers, all of us formers, like to stick around and try to be helpful, and we really care very much about what is going on, and how the folks who are working inside the institution are dealing with the challenges of today. So first, I want to introduce Charles W. Johnson, who served as the parliamentarian from 1994 until 2004 in the House. He actually served the House for 50 years. He was first appointed in 1964 as assistant parliamentarian. If there was anybody who wrote the book on parliamentary process, this is the guy. So he even he was a co-author on a 2010 book, Parliament and Congress, Representation and Scrutiny in the 21st Century. And so, Mr. Johnson, I was going to suggest that recent events might merit a new chapter to that book. But we're so happy you could join us. I know you're going to see lots of parliamentary faux pas in the script that we'll be playing around with, but I look forward to your insight on what how the process goes. And then next, I hope that we have Bob Inglis, who is going to join us. I see a 240 number that I'm going to allow to talk. 240423, is that?
I saw Bob Inglis join.
Oh, we
Marci.
did, okay. Maybe that's not that one. I'm not seeing him here.
Marci, I believe he was going to join online. Not
Online, okay. Well, I'm not seeing him yet, unless he has a nom de guerre.
Let's go ahead with the, it could be Energy and Enterprise or Republic N.
Okay.
He popped up in chat as Republic N.
Okay, very good. Then I am promoting to panelist Republican. Bob, if that's you, you will get a request to rejoin as a panelist. That makes sense. English. Excellent, I see you. Okay, I think we've got everyone now. And so I will introduce Bob Inglis of South Carolina, who served in the House from 1993 to 1999, and again from 2005 to 2011. He was on the Committee on Foreign Affairs and the Committee on Science and Tech. And in 2012, launched the Energy and Enterprise Initiative at George Mason, promoting conservative and free enterprise solutions to energy and climate challenges. Thank you, Mr. Inglis, for joining us. And finally, I am very happy to introduce our chairman for the day, Baird of Washington, who served in the House from 1999 to 2011, and was also a member of the Science and Tech Committee and also Transportation and Infrastructure. After September 11th, Brian became very involved in efforts to talk about congressional continuity after disaster, and he has been sounding this alarm ever since, and I think we'll have lots to say about the current situation. So with that extended introduction, I will turn it over to Mr. Chairman Brian Baird.
Great, Marci, thanks to you. Thanks to everyone who helped set this up and who is participating. My friend Bob Inglis, good to see you again. We spent a lot of time in the committees, not quite like this, but good to see you, and thank you for being part of it. And of course, Charles Johnson is, I think, the foremost scholar about parliamentary procedure in the U.S. House, and it has great depth of knowledge. Charlie, thank you for being with us. So, as Marci said, this is going to be a dry run at best. we will make mistakes, but we will learn from those. So this will probably be the first iteration of multiple efforts. I also want to apologize in advance. It's been a while since Bob and I chaired a hearing, and we don't have a staff member standing over our shoulder handing us papers we're supposed to read. So we will make mistakes. So don't criticize us if we leave something out. The main goal is to get the sort of protocol and the tech sorted out. The other thing I really have to say before we begin is we're going to have some fun. We'll make some mistakes, but the topic is about as serious as it could possibly get. I'm in Seattle, or near Seattle, and as you know, for a long time, we were the epicenter of this disease. I have dear friends working on the front lines in medicine. We know people who are sick, and we now know colleagues in Congress who are sick. So finding a way that we can keep the longest constitutional democratic republic functioning in a valid representative way, not with some rump scattered group that happens to be able to get together, is of paramount importance to our country and possibly to the world. So thank you for being part of this. We'll proceed in the following way. We'll sort of begin the hearing as if it were a hearing. We urge you, while we do this, if you think of something that, oh gosh, I've seen some chats, for example, oh, we need to make sure that there can be private chats between staffer and panelists, which is good. We need to have abilities to do that. So make notes in chat or on a piece of paper so that you can share those with us afterwards, because your feedback as participants and observers will help us make this process better. And we'll probably do a second or even third round as we get better and better, so we can share what we've learned with the House and Senate when the time comes. So with that, I have now got my singing Buddhist bowl instead of a gavel, and I will gavel this committee to session. I actually wish we started our hearings that way. This committee will now come to order. I'd like to thank the witnesses and the members of the public who are present. I will recognize myself for 30 seconds for an opening statement, and then the ranking member for 30 seconds. And then we'll introduce the witnesses for their opening statements. Each member will then have 30 seconds to ask questions. Again, I'll point out we're truncating this for the purpose of making this an expeditious process. Then we'll ask committee staff to read the proposed bill and amendments. We'll have time to ask questions or offer amendments. And after all those are offered, we'll hold votes on the amendments and then a vote on the bill. And for those who may have just joined, Marci pointed out earlier, this is somewhat of a hybrid. We want to practice a hearing model and then a markup model in today's presentation and activities. With that, my opening statement has basically been made. I want to thank our witnesses, our panelists, and all the people who organized this. And I will now recognize my friend and co-chair, Bob Inglis, a gentleman from South Carolina.
Well, good to be with you, Mr. Chairman, again. And as the bill before us has been hastily conceived because of the urgent circumstances. So we're all a little bit unprepared about the bill, but we'll see how this goes. So we're hoping that the witnesses will help us understand it better, and that our questions will be useful. So thank you for holding the hearing, and looking forward to the markup. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Inglis. I will now introduce the witnesses and invite them to make their opening statements. Each witness has submitted a written statement, which is available on the committee website and will also be in the online chat available by staff. Our first witness,
Well,
Samantha. Sorry?
Excuse me, we do not have Samantha McDonald with us, so it will just
okay,
be
thank
Lorelei
you.
Kelly.
All right, great. Our first witness will be Lorelei Kelly. She is a complete genius. Not laughing at you, Lorelei, laughing at the script. She's able to link up with us from Dodge City on the road, so that's impressive right there. She literally wrote the book on this topic, and even though she picked the wrong basketball team, chuckle, chuckle, we are tremendously grateful to have her expertise as we consider this important issue. Ms. Kelly, you will have 30 seconds for your opening statement, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. Can you hear me?
We're fine.
I'm amazed that even in the middle of Kansas, there's 3 cell towers within within reaching distance. Mr. Chairman, ranking member, distinguished members of the committee, thank you so much for the opportunity to address this committee and this important issue. I join Ms. McDonald in heralding the bravery and sacrifice of our frontline healthcare workers. I'm here today to share stories of our first responders, the men and women of the police, ambulance services, fire, health workers everywhere, frontline soldiers in this war against the coronavirus who are answering the calls of those who are sick and impacted by the virus. This resolution is to recognize them and do everything we can as a nation and a people to be a resilient community. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kelly. I realize I neglected to mention to those who may not have a text of the script that the focus of today's resolution is to honor the men and women who have and are serving this country in the healthcare services as first responders and others as we deal with this coronavirus question. Our next witness do we have a next witness?
That's it. Our next witness didn't make it in, so
Okay,
we'll
got
just
it.
move to
Great.
questions.
We'll now have 30 seconds each to question the witnesses. Ms. Kelly, tell us a little bit about, from your experience, why you feel this is such an important resolution.
I think it's a resolution because it's going to start us off on a high note and recognizing the nature of globalized threats that we're dealing with today, but we have actually been dealing with for 20 years at this point. And that one of the first things we should be doing is recognize the people taking the risks on behalf of all of us in our society, our frontline healthcare workers, emergency responders. As we all know, they have taken up the cause for all of us since the end of the Cold War, going on 30 years. And I want this resolution to be the first premise and step toward building a more resilient nation with a more realistic view of what concerns us as a security threat today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Kelly. I recognize the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Inglis, ranking member.
Yeah, Ms. Kelly, what do you think are the long-term challenges here? Do you think this is a different situation than we've faced before?
I actually do think that we've been facing a world of interconnected, interdependent, not only mutual assistance, and communication, but also a different kind of threat, a threat that doesn't recognize borders, and a threat that's dramatically impacted by all of the wonders of the modern world, including interconnectedness and communication. And technology can either help us through this and build a stronger and more resilient nation. This is a pivot and a surge moment, or it can harm us further. So I feel like today is a moment for us to sit down and not only address the anecdotes of individual workers and frontline health and first responders, but also have it represent and symbolize a much larger conversation about America's presence in the world today and how we decide to use technology to benefit everyone.
Thank you, Ms. Kelly. I appreciate that response. I'm going to remind our witnesses and the panelists that we'll need to keep our comments within the very abbreviated 30-second response. The chair now recognizes Michael Thorning for 30 seconds to ask a question of the witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I know I couldn't get my technology up to speed here quite as fast as the timer started, so I hope you'll give me a few seconds to get underway here. But I'd like to say, Ms. Kelly, I think it's so important that we recognize these people. My predecessors from New Mexico for a long time tried to recognize people in these positions, whether it was uranium mine workers in World War II or a registry for burn pit victims, or service members affected by burn pits in Afghanistan. Do you think we need a registry of healthcare workers who've been affected by this or who've been infected in case there are downstream health consequences so the government can keep track of them?
I certainly think that it's an important thing to start structuring data at every level right now about who's impacted, who are the frontline workers, how do we do activities in our development community and our global assistance community, and certainly here in the United States. This is not the first time that we've gone through an epidemic where we have epidemiologists and all kinds of other people that need to be communicating constantly and together. So yes, I do think that we need some kind of a registry, although it needs to have protections around it for not only privacy purposes, but also so we can make sure that it remains in use for the public good.
Thank you very much. The chair now recognizes Representative Kevin Easterling from the minority for 30 seconds to question the witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Kelly, for sharing your expertise with us today. I'm hearing from the hospital administrators in my district that they want to do more remote visits, but they're finding there's all sorts of federal regulations and red tape, reimbursement policy issues. Is there a way that you recommend that we fix all of that?
Well, the first thing I would say is I'm not a doctor or a nurse, although my mom is a school nurse in Farmington, New Mexico for 35 years. I would suggest that right now the communication between local public health officials and anybody on the front line is of utmost importance. And this is a job not only for the people with the medical skills, but also people with digital skills, distance skills, public safety, perimeter security, all kinds of different skills like that. So to answer your question, I think that the only people that can answer that question with any authority are folks that know something about contagious disease. And I would argue that there's probably resources in every state and locality if we can somehow get them connected and develop some standard protocols and best practices immediately.
Thank you, Ms. Kelly. I very much appreciate it. That concludes the testimony from the witness and the questioning from the panelist. I'd like to thank the witness for her testimony, and we will now move. Again, this is not, oh, we have a guest behind you. That's fun to see. We
This is a 13-year-old doing distance learning in a car.
I've got some 15-year-olds behind me hidden away. I'd like to thank the witness again, and we will now move to consider the resolution and the markup. This is a hasty process, and maybe Congress can learn not only about the technology, but how to expedite the legislative process. The clerk shall report the resolution. Is that you, Marci?
That is Daniel, but he may be muted. I'm gonna find, he was having to call in because he lost power in his home.
I can read it if Daniel's not available.
I think he has to be re-promoted to panelist. That's what it is.
And again,
Daniel, you're on.
Available to post this in written form, or at least a digital form online during an actual hearing, of course.
So I'm going to post it. It will be a Google Doc, which I know would not be the format that would be used, but it is in the chat now and should be viewable by all panelists and attendees.
Thank you, and I'm happy to read the resolution. It's a resolution expressing the appreciation of the House of Representatives on behalf of all Americans to the men and women working in healthcare professions to treat patients and combat the spread of COVID-19.
I ask that the resolution be considered as read. Without objection, so ordered. The bill was circulated in advance pursuant to committee. The first reading is dispensed with. We now move to...
I object.
Mr. Esterling is recognized. Mr. Esterling, please state your objection.
I don't think that my concerns about bureaucratic red tape have been adequately addressed in this resolution.
Does the gentleman wish to offer an amendment?
I yield my time.
Okay. I thank the gentleman for yielding his time. I appreciate that concern. Perhaps we can address that at another opportunity. So with that,
I move to dispense with the reading of the bill.
Thank you very much. The gentlelady's motion is in order. All in favor say aye.
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 And all opposed, no. The ayes have it. So
I call for a recorded vote.
Mr. Esterling, you've called for a recorded vote on dispensing the reading. All right. The clerk will call the roll.
Representative Baird.
No.
Representative Baird votes no. Representative Inglis.
No.
Representative Inglis votes no. Representative Thorning.
Yes.
Representative Thorning votes yes. Representative Abernathy.
No.
Representative Abernathy votes no. Representative Thomas.
No.
Representative Thomas votes no. Representative Easterling.
Yes.
Representative Easterling votes yes. Representative Yoder.
No.
Representative Yoder votes no. Representative Foreman. Representative Foreman. I'm not hearing a vote from Representative Foreman. All right,
Double
the clerk is
checking
ready.
that they're in.
Okay.
You can go
This
ahead
one-
and call.
I think that's all our participants, right, Marci?
Yes.
At this
Yes,
point,
roll call.
my friend and parliamentarian Charlie Johnson is probably saying, "You knuckleheads, you just voted the wrong way," because I may have set the precedent. So my assumption was we were voting no on reading the full bill, if that's what the gentleman was asking for. But if not, we'll assume that we were voting no on that, and that the noes have it, so we can dispense with the reading.
I can report the results if you'd like.
Please, that would be great.
Sure. The votes are 5 nay and 2 aye. The nays carry.
Okay, so we've dispensed with the reading of the bill, I think, and we will now proceed to amendments. Although at this point, I think Representative Abernathy may have a question of consideration.
I raise a question of consideration.
Lady raises a question of consideration, which is not debatable. The question is, does the committee wish to consider the resolution? All those in favor say aye. All in favor say aye, please.
Aye.
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 It appears to the chair that the ayes have it. All those opposed say no.
No.
It appears to the chair that the ayes have it. The motion is, hang on just a sec. Yes, the motion is carried. The committee wishes to raise a resolution. Resolution is now open for amendment. Without objection, the resolution be considered as read for amendment and be open for amendment at any point. Is there discussion of the resolution? Chair, Mr. Inglis, do you have an amendment to offer?
Do I? I don't think so.
So, Bob. How about I do this? The clerk shall report the amendment.
Oh, yes. Oh, I do. Oh, yes. I've got an amendment at the desk. I didn't realize I had one. Okay, I've got an amendment at the desk.
Thank you, Mr. Inglis. The clerk shall report the amendment.
Sure. Amendment number 1, strike men and women and replace with people.
I ask unanimous consent that the further reading of the amendment be dispensed with. Without objection, so ordered. The co-chair is now recognized for 30 seconds on his amendment.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I think that it's just better language to put people rather than men and women to make it completely inclusive. So let's make this inclusive of all the people out there, the first responders.
I thank the gentleman for the amendment. I associate myself with his remarks. Are there any others wishing to speak to the amendment? Hearing none, the question is on the amendment proposed by the co-chairman. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no.
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 In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Other amendments may now be considered. Does anyone seek recognition to offer an amendment?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment. It's not the amendment that I had originally submitted to the clerk, and I guess I asked for guidance from the committee on how we might make sure the rest of the members could get that amendment.
Okay, Mr. Thorning, does the clerk wish to offer a comment on that, an observation on that?
We're going to receive that amendment by email, and then it will be shared with the public and with all members. It will take just a minute.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to ask the clerk, will this amendment be coming to us via a chat format?
I think probably it will come into the chat or can be posted by the member into the chat if you have a link to it. That's perfect.
Mr. Chairman, I think my staff has provided, I think we've sent a link here. I hope we've got it set up properly, but I've sent that to you now.
I have received that. If other members have not received it, please let the chair know. It's a relatively brief amendment. I'll ask the clerk to read the amendment and then ask the gentleman to speak to it.
This is the amendment from Representative Thorning. Insert at 3, it is the policy of the United States to create a national registry of all healthcare workers, first responders, and other emergency personnel confirmed to have been exposed to COVID-19 in order to track potential long-term health effects and to provide future compensation for their exposure as the result of their service, and change item 2 to item 4.
I ask that the amendment be entered as read. Without objection, so ordered. The gentleman will speak to his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I mentioned in our hearing, our experience in New Mexico is that we often have people who in public service are exposed to all kinds of things that we don't know what the downstream health effects are going to be for them. And I want to make sure we're on top of tracking this ahead of time. So I submit the amendment to the committee.
I thank the gentleman for his amendment. Are there others wishing to comment on the amendment? Hearing no further comment, the question is on the amendment by Mr. Thorning. All in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed,
Aye.
no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment in the is agreed to, and we now move that the. Or are there other amendments? Do other members wish to offer amendments? Hearing none, the question is on agreeing to the resolution as amended. All those in favor of the resolution as amended will say aye.
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 All those opposed, no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, although it's close. Does anyone wish to
Mr.
ask for?
Chairman. Yes.
What's that?
I'd like to ask for a recorded vote, Mr. Chairman.
A recorded vote has been requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Representative Baird.
Aye.
Representative Baird votes aye. Representative Inglis.
Aye.
Representative Inglis votes aye. Representative Thorning.
Aye.
Representative Thorning votes aye. Representative Abernathy.
Aye.
Representative Abernathy votes aye. Representative Thomas.
Aye.
Representative Thomas votes aye. Representative Esterling.
No.
Representative Esterling votes no. Representative Yoder.
No.
No. Representative Voter votes no. Representative Foreman. Representative Foreman. Representative Foreman will be recorded as not voting. Clerk reports 5 yay, 2 nay, 1 not voting. So it passes.
The ayes have it then. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Oops, I missed that earlier. Sufficient number having voted in the affirmative, the resolution will be favorably reported. So that concludes our very brief effort at both a hearing and a markup in record time on what would actually be a quite worthy measure. I apologize for the chair's rustiness in protocol and procedure. Thanks everybody for the participation. Now let's discuss this, and I'm going to give it back to Marci to moderate this. And Marci, I know you have some questions, and again, thanks to everybody for participating in this. Let's see what we've learned. Marci, it's up to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you all so much. And I also would like to apologize for the abysmal parliamentary procedure there. I think we had some votes in the script that didn't make any sense, and that's my fault completely. And actually, I think some of the issues that we saw coming up in the chat are already super informative. I would actually really like to invite Charles to speak if he would be willing to just from the perspective of someone who's been watching and not to comment on the process and procedure, but would love to have your thoughts just in what just took place. And we may have you muted, so I'll try to.
Charlie might be unmuted himself.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm speaking to you by my phone. Chairman Baird needs some help.
No question, Charlie. But that's a valid point, Charlie. How would I get help if we did that? That's a valid point.
Marci, there's nothing about your script that could have helped him. Maybe there was, but the issue of how votes are requested and automatically conducted is somewhat confusing, because one representative asked for the roll call and the chair automatically proceeded to the roll call rather than try to ascertain whether a sufficient number of members wanted to have the roll call. Mm-hmm. Now, in many House committees, when any single member asks for a roll call, it's automatic. That's totally true in the Rules Committee. So you don't have to worry about 1/5 of those present asking for the yeas and nays. But if someone's a stickler, that is the constitutional requirement, that 1/5 of those present first have to decide whether to have a recorded vote. And if that were the case, you'd have to have a preliminary indication of who wanted to have a recorded vote. And that itself would not necessarily require the names be taken, but it is a constitutional requirement if someone were to insist upon it. So the whole level,
Go ahead, please. I didn't mean to interrupt.
the whole level of how you embark on recorded votes and what are the threshold requirements to get there is something that you might want to discuss further.
I'm going to mute you, Charles, just because there's an echo. But I want you to jump back in if you have additional points, because that was really important. And I think that question combined with a question from Chris Espinosa about how a member would make a parliamentary inquiry when a hearing is ongoing, I think is one of those technical questions that really has to be considered. And I know part of the complication here was that we were moving so fast. So in a lot of ways, it was difficult to fit in some normal hearings just move more slowly. So the opportunity to have a parliamentary inquiry or for the parliamentarian to flag that maybe the chairman missed something and need to have some kind of indication of who's supporting a vote would need to be there. But I think thinking through the technical process of how that would happen is perhaps a really important thing to work out.
Yeah, and Bob Inglis here. If one of the things that I see is that the ability of the chair to control the microphone would be something that would have to be explored, because you, Marci, as the one in charge of this meeting, can mute, for example, Charlie right now. So Charlie could be, say Charlie were not the parliamentarian, but a member, he'd be saying right now, parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Chairman, and we wouldn't know it. And so now quite often in Congress, Charlie, I guess people run over those verbal insertions and act like they didn't hear them, but that causes the volume to go up by the one objecting, and finally their volume gets high enough that it's, all the microphones are picking it up, so the chairman can't avoid it anymore. But in this context, you really could, you got to figure out some way to make it so that maybe in the chat or somewhere it's like this: no, you've got to stop right now because, and of course, if it's recorded, you'd know if the chairman stopped. It'd actually be better procedure than what we've got right now in Congress, because a chairman, if he or she wants to, can just run roughshod over somebody that's objecting, didn't hear it, and move along. It happens. And so, I don't know, it'd be interesting to put it in the chat that, no, I object. And then everything has to stop there.
I'm going to unmute Charles for that.
The rest of us, Marci, while Charlie talks.
Okay. Charles, you are unmuted, and I apologize if you had objections that were being raised earlier.
See?
Neither Bob nor Brian were, during their terms of office, would ever for a moment try to run roughshod over the chair.
That's right.
They were both presiding officers at various times with standing results. The main tool of our trade was the mute button on the rostrum, where if the parliamentarian didn't want the chair to make an immediate response, the parliamentarian could mute the chair's microphone long enough at least to have a conversation with it. And that was an absolutely essential tool of the trade.
And Charles, I'm so sorry. I am going to mute you again, just
Marci,
because.
let's ask everyone else to mute theirs. If we all mute ours, I think Charlie will come through okay.
I actually have everybody muted
Okay,
now. This is just, it's one of those things you knew was going to happen. Charlie, I'm going to unmute you, but if there is any way that you could, if you have headphones or something like that, it might cause less of an echo, Charles. I'm unmuting again.
Does Charlie have his computer on or?
So he's with us by phone. Oh, that's what it is. If you can mute either the phone or the computer, that should fix it.
All right, I'll mute the computer.
Yes.
There we go.
Is that better?
Much better.
That better? Okay. Now I'm speaking into my phone, but I was just talking about the importance of the mute button to make sure that the chair is communicating as well as possible to the members, but possibly, hopefully, taking the advice of the parliamentarian who's on duty. And the mute button was essential to allowing that preliminary communication to take place. Now, whether that's doable remotely, I don't know. But the other one of the favorite responses that we would suggest to the chair as parliamentarians is, I'm sorry, Representative, that is not a parliamentary inquiry. And that would be, if it were more a question of debate or a constitutional question as opposed to a parliamentary question, that could be a response. So the chair's ability to minimize questions that he shouldn't answer, at least at the moment, is very important.
Well,
and,
so Charlie, that's very interesting. So there is a button on the rostrum that you would push, and then the main microphone doesn't work.
That's right. Yeah, that button activated two sets of speaker systems, one for the television and one for the in-chamber sound. And by pushing it, the parliamentarian, it was right at his left shoulder level, and the chair did not control it. The parliamentarian did. So anytime we wanted the chair to have a conversation with us, we could keep that conversation from being broadcast and telecast.
Well, and here
that was helpful.
There is the function of raising a hand. So we had Representative Esterling was just displaying the hand raise, and also for anyone who's an attendee instead of a panelist, I think you're also able to raise your hand. So if you have questions or points to make there, please just raise your hand there or drop it in the chat. We have a few questions and points that have come up in the chat that I can read out, but also I wanted to call on Ananda and Michael to share. They wanted to offer an amendment that was not already that we didn't already have, and that's another thing that is probably going to be really important. And of course, I know every committee has their system for how you would send an amendment and how it would be distributed already. Even somebody's got to take the amendment and print it out and make the copies and pass them around. But Ananda and Michael, do you want to say something about that process, that experience?
Yeah, I might just say really quickly, I thought it was an interesting thing. Marci, thank you for entertaining my little bit of a curveball that we threw there. Probably the most important thing I think for us, and Ananda can speak to this a little bit more, is just, the communication between she and I. I told her I had this thing, and, could you find out can you ask the chairman's staff how we might submit it, which I think, is, my boss would ask me kind of questions like that all the time. Like, can we do this thing? Can you ask the chairman's staff this or that? And it's important to know who that line of communication was to. And also, if I was a member, I'd want to know that my chat, it says, yeah, this chat is private between Ananda and I, but do I really know that that's private? I think would be a concern for me. And would her chat with the chairman's staff really be private? But Ananda might have more to add.
Yeah, I was just going to say it would be helpful for the next mock markup that we do to have the full list of, because I only had the list of a couple of people who I was working with, but that would make sense that I would know ahead of time who every other person participating is, including their staff, which, yeah, I think that'll be a really interesting question though. I mean, what happens if we're virtual, if I message another staff member and they don't respond to me? And that's perfectly plausible, and in fact they might have an easy way to avoid responding to me if they don't want to, whereas I can, in a hearing room, go up to somebody in person, obviously.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And also trying to figure out how staffers and members are currently communicating. I know some use text message and things like that now as a part of normal process, and others do not.
So it seems we're going to have sort of at least 3 levels of quasi-confidential, actual confidential connections. I have to speak to my own staff. Staff may have to speak to each other. The parliamentarian or the council may need to speak to the chair confidentially, and that'll have to all be pretty protected, so that somebody's not spying in and saying, "Oh, Congressman Baird's staff member said something to him, and now that's going to become public." Because my staff will be scattered as well, not only the members. The staff will be scattered as well.
Right.
That's good feedback.
I agree, and I think it could be easy for a member to, at least in the way the chat function here works, or a staff or somebody, to make a mistake. Thinking, oh, I thought I had clicked private, to my boss, and I'm about to say, this other member is being a real jerk or something, and now I've just said it, for the whole world to see.
Yes, I think that is a danger. And I think probably a member or staffer would want a separate channel for communicating among their own staff. But that question about how they communicate to committee staff or with each other, I think is still a big question. There were questions about how it works when lots of people are talking at the same time. Members, how do you handle that under normal circumstances?
Bob, go ahead.
Yeah, it's, that's the prerogative of the chair, I suppose, is to make sure to listen to whoever he or she wants to listen to, right? And then you got to wait. If you're the one that hasn't been heard, you got to wait until the next juncture. But yeah, that's, one of the things that I could see working well here is you could turn off the microphone at the end of at the end of the 5 minutes. And so it's, I've spoken in some places like that where they say, listen, the microphone is going off at 5 minutes or whatever. And so you can stand up there and still be talking, but the 5,000 people here aren't going to hear a word you say. So there's real discipline on the speaker that you've got to, you're not going to be speaking after 5 minutes when the time's up. So it's interesting to have the timer show up on the screen, taking the place of the person's face. I can see how if the screen were split into a number of pieces so that it had that timer perhaps, and had chats from parliamentarian, chat from staff, chat from other members, it'd be actually, I could see a way of doing that using this kind of technology. I could also see how votes could be better informed by having the amendment right on the screen here, or even showing it in the bill somehow, as a true markup of the bill. As it is in Congress, right now you're in a meeting and they hand out all these pieces of paper, and you've just come back from the ante room, and now you're trying to figure out where it fits in this bill, and you're quite often lost.
Well, and I should flag that there are actually some folks on the call from markup.law who are working on that exact technology, and we'll figure out a way to have a demo of that.
It'd be a very interesting way to actually improve communication in the legislative process to see exactly where the change is being made.
Great.
Yeah, I would concur with Bob. I think there's a possibility that this will actually make things better in a number of ways that we don't have access to in a regular hearing, and that's
right.
one where, and especially when an amendment refers to something in another piece of legislation, so to modify clause X, section Y, whatever, and you don't have that, the mental train, somebody in the building seems to have it oftentimes, but the average member can't easily jump to that other prior bill or parallel bill and see what it is we're modifying. And that can be a problem.
Well, and Daniel, both as clerk and also with some insight into the POSI system that that is under development, do you want to say some things about your experience and that technology? Oh, we can't hear you. I'm going to unmute you. There you go.
Thank you, and I apologize for the unusual nature of this video. My house power went out 2 minutes before this whole thing started, so I had to switch over to my phone. And yet it worked fine. I was able to keep track of the votes and do all the stuff. So the House clerk is in the process of and has already internally demoed a tool that allows you to see how an amendment changes a bill and how a bill changes a law in real time. It's sometimes called the comparative print project. It's sometimes called being done pursuant to the POSI rule. I've seen a demo of it. It is actually phenomenal. It literally shows you where it gets inserted or all the changes that are taking place by the different titles. And there's a lot more that's coming. The biggest issue that they have is that they don't have enough funding to complete it. But it looks beautiful and it works really well. I know this is something that members have wanted for a very long time. And on the other side, in terms of vote tracking, so one thing that we can do, in addition to having someone who's a much better clerk than I am, keeping track of the votes, and I put this up in the chat, is I'm currently using a Google Doc to keep track of all of the votes. So you can actually see as I'm recording in real time, as I'm putting down a number, you can see, oh, this person's being recorded. Yes, this person's being recorded. No, you can see the vote totals. I don't think this is going to work, but maybe. So this is literally how I was keeping track of it. So you can see each of the votes, how people voted, an automatic total, and so on and so forth. And this is a shared document. So if you click on the link in the chat, it's a little further up. You can actually watch in real time as I'm tracking the votes. So if I erroneously record Miss Yoder as voting yay instead of nay or present instead of not present, you can immediately message me and I can correct it, as opposed to it being done on paper the way it is now. And this also facilitates the online posting of it so that you can check to make sure I'm not screwing up the votes or misattributing the wrong things, see the work product in real time.
I think it is the case though that Google Docs are not technically approved for House use. Is that right?
No. Well, you could create a Google Excel. So House allows you to use 365. So you could use Microsoft Sheets, Microsoft Excel, which has a similar functionality to this. So you could use that.
The nature of the tech is less important than the concept, and I love that concept that in real time you can watch the tally. Of course, we can do that on the floor of the House easily, but you can't do that in the committee rooms, and especially if you're someone whose vote could really matter to your reelect, or you're the swing vote and the tally's getting close, that would be very, very helpful.
We have a race. Oh, excuse me.
No, just as we're having this conversation that I'm thinking, I think I'm relatively adept at technology. It is a lot of potentially different windows and things for a member to manage and their staff, and to try to, I was thinking, Daniel, I think that's a great idea. Potentially, maybe it could be built into some kind of future software. But if you're having I've got to click now to make sure, that this is, my vote was recorded correctly, or my staff has to do it, and then they have to chat me, and there's just, it could be good, but it gets complicated.
Yeah, I think you're right. So what I did was just simply, I'm sorry, you get to see my home office now. I literally just have two windows open. So one is the ongoing conversation, including the chat that's on the left. And on the right is both the roll call, the voting, and I also have similarly the amendments that are at the desk. So this is what allowed me to go sort of back and forth, to be able to be responsive as you need me to read things. And what you can do with Zoom is you can actually share your desktop. So the clerk would have to be somewhat more technically adept than most folks. But you could literally make it in focus so you can see, oh, the clerk's reading the text of the resolution here. The clerk's reading the text of the amendment here. And it would be able to display on people's machines so they'd be able to see exactly what the clerk is looking at that time. And from a management side, so it's a little harder on the clerk, but I've got over here, as you can see, I've got the window for you all. I've got the chat that's going on the side. I can see whatever text messages people are sending to me directly. It's actually, for me at least, it's Oop, my thumb is in the wrong spot. That's not good. It's fairly easy to manage most of the technology here. And I suspect that if you go to more remote proceedings, you would have someone who would probably be helping out the clerk in terms of managing sort of the symphony of the different instruments of like what information is displayed and helping to manage the data. And like, so like this wouldn't be on as well for the member who's sitting in the committee room, but they'd have their staffer who travels with them, you know, who manages that committee for them, who would also be able to check these things, and they'd be able to signal back and forth if there is an error that's made by the clerk or elsewhere.
Excellent. Thank you, Daniel. So I want to read a really good input that came in from an observer, Joanna Derman. Thank you so much. She said, number one, I understand the desire not to have everybody who's participating always on video in order to limit facial expression and responses, but I'm seconding someone's earlier point that a running list of who is present would be helpful. So I think that's a really good point. I've also never used Zoom before, so it would be helpful for Marci or another moderator to clarify that all observers' mics are muted at the beginning, because potentially observers didn't know what was going on if they were trying to speak. And I think we would need some kind of mechanism or plan for producing a secure written transcript of the markup or the hearing. And just on that, we actually invited, but I don't think they were able to attend, some folks from the clerk's office to look through and see if they would be able to do their work as providing a transcript. We'll also follow up with them and ask them to watch the video and give us a thought on that. And Kevin points out that Zoom has a feature to create a closed caption of the recording, etc. Lorelei's got a hand up, and then I'll pass it back over to our members to close us up.
Yeah, I would just want to see if Charlie Johnson has any additional things he wants to offer. And I'm sure, Charlie, we can offline after this is over have a much more lengthy discussion, because I'm sure your mind was filled with thoughts and ideas about
Go there, take it this way.
I'm meeting you.
what can we do to what are some key final thoughts from you?
Brian, I know the clerk's office is looking at this. My thinking is more focused on plenary sessions, the full house, than the relative informality of committee proceedings. And the gentleman who just spoke about the POSI technique of simultaneous showing changes in existing law or textual changes, something I'd heard about and potentially welcome. It sounds like a wonderful technology. I'll just share one quick story. Back in the 90s, the Rules Committee wanted to consider remote voting for members from the West Coast. And they did an experiment. And it was a fellow named, I think, Scott McDevitt who was on the Rules Committee. And they set up a conference call to try to testify remotely in this Rules Committee hearing. And I was there as a witness, and I had just finished testifying about the sanctity, that was my favorite word, about the chamber and members having to be together, and that remoteness was not a constitutional or proper parliamentary alternative. And just then their sound went off. And so these three members who were communicating remotely could no longer communicate. And I just did a kind of a quiet hurrah when that happened, but that was then. And I honor your folks, your efforts here, and I want to stay tuned, Brian, with you and you folks to be assured that the parliamentarian's office and the clerk's office and many others are looking at this as we speak from a plenary and committee perspective. Thank you for allowing.
Hey, Charlie, you sure you didn't push the button on those speakers?
Bob, if I had one member to push the button on, it wouldn't have been you.
Charlie, I appreciate that. I think, and I think your points are well taken. One of the challenges we're facing here is, of course, we can lose our vote through technological issues if our power goes out or our internet is cut. But in the current climate, we can lose our vote the hard way, which is by dying or becoming incapacitated. And you know that well. And so that's that's the challenge we face. And of course, it's the challenge we've faced since before 9/11, but we've been trying to raise it. Two other quick thoughts I would ask, and then I'll ask Bob if he has final thoughts. One is, as chair, it's plausible to imagine sort of an AI parliamentarian, meaning some kind of thing that comes up on my screen. I was having to read from notes here, but there may be some way for me to just look and say, what are my options here? As Charlie knows well, but would be too wise and politic to discuss. Many of us as chair are flying by the seat of our pants, especially when we first get there. And we totally rely on the parliamentarian or the legal counsel to tell us what to do, because we just don't know. And I felt that a little bit today. It's been so long since I did it, even those of us who tried to do it right. So some ways in which we can facilitate the work here could be incredibly helpful. Bob, any additional comments you have?
Yeah, it just shows what you're just describing there. I think shows the importance of the parliamentarian and the and just how significant a role the professional staff play in Congress to keep things moving with some degree of decorum and legitimacy, because and really it's sort of the silent institution that's protecting the House and the Senate, and the unseen, because like Charlie says, push that button so they're not heard telling the speaker and the chair, you can't say that, or stop, you're doing this wrong, because it really is a very important role that would have to be worked in some way so that it's discreet enough so it doesn't look like there's somebody running things behind the scene, because surely what I've always experienced with Charlie and others in the parliamentarian's office is calling it straight. And that's just such an important role here. And we need confidence in the public that, there are people like that serve the Congress and keep it running well.
Thank you, Bob. Marci, my final comment would be to thank you and your group and the others involved here trying to set this up. It's so important to have former members, former staff, and others who care so much about this institution, and also the members of the media, C-SPAN and others who I know have been participating today, to try to continue to make this institution we so dearly love valid and functioning, even in times of national crisis and outbreaks such as we have. So thank you for hosting this. And I know a lot of work went into it, and I know a lot will come out of it. And I hope we'll continue to further refine this process. And thanks for allowing Bob and I to be part of this.
Well, we just thank you so much for sharing your experience and your perspective and your wisdom. And for everybody who participated, there will be follow-up. So you'll get a survey as soon as this is over. Please also share via email with me. I'm going to be compiling it all and sharing with all of you. We're also put out as much as we can, kind of in aggregate publicly. We'll share the video, and hopefully it looks like we probably need to do this again too. There's some issues to work out. So thank you all for being a part of it, and I look forward to your feedback. Take care.
Thank you, Charlie, especially very much for your participation.
Absolutely, Charlie. It was amazing. Take
Everybody
care.
Stay safe out there and be healthy.
Thank you.